Well, good morning, Awakening. How are we doing this morning? Good. Great to be with you. My name's Ryan, if we've never met. And today we're concluding a series called Unstuck, where we've been asking, how do you get unstuck from some of the most significant areas of life? And we're concluding with work on Super Bowl Sunday, which is kind of appropriate because there's a large number of people. I don't know if there are any of them in this place, but that will call in sick tomorrow for work on that. And so, some people have lobbied to make Super Bowl Monday a holiday afterwards. So we're going to begin on work, and what I want to begin with is actually something that we've said. If you've been around for a long time, we've talked about this, but it's just acknowledging the environment that we live in. We call it the Silicon Valley hustle, that there's just a pace, isn't there here? There's you would call it a rhythm, but it's not really a rhythm, it's a grind. That's what my friend last night, we had our small group last night, and it was great. We're going through the Freed Up together, and he's just talking about the grind with me. There's this hustle, this frenetic energy, and it goes something like this in the Silicon Valley: success at any cost. And I think that's the God of the Valley. Success is we have to be successful, and what happens, the result is success at the expense of significance, isn't it? Where is the meaning? Where is the purpose? Is this all there really is? And then something that we do is we wear busyness as a badge of honor, don't we? How are you doing today? Busy, right? And if you don't say busy, don't you feel like a failure? Fantastic, rested. You're like, what are you doing with your life? You must be, anyways. But busyness as a badge of honor, and what happens is, this is what we experience, we're overworked yet underfulfilled. You just feel that edge of, burnout and just kind of the weariness, maybe even emptiness. And the end goal of all this, and actually this is what we're talking about in week 1 of Freed Up, was financial freedom's the goal, right? And we all define that a little bit differently, but, to be able to do what you want, whenever you want, go wherever you want, to be able to maybe retire young, whatever financial freedom is. But here's what happens, isn't it? We often end up with more money, but less in what the Bible calls shalom, what we would call peace. But that word peace isn't quite enough. Biblically, shalom is this idea of a sense of wholeness, completeness. Peace, we understand peace as a lack of strife, which that certainly is there, but it's far more than just a lack of strife. It is a state of a sense of pervasive well-being. That this sense of I'm just shalom, at peace, whole, living an integrated life. The sermon title today is 90,000 hours. Go ahead and say that to your neighbor. 90,000 hours. It's been estimated that the average person will work 90,000 hours in their lifetime. Roughly a third of your life is at work. And the tragedy is for us is so much of it is filled with stress, anxiety, and burnout. A third of our life, 90,000 hours, stress, anxiety, and burnout. And so today, let's wrestle with work. If we're going to spend a third of our life in it, let's talk about it. And what does God's wisdom have to say to help us navigate and live life wisely and well, to work wisely and well? And under that, we really have to ask the question, what does success really look like? What does success look like for you? And we all kind of have this mental image or picture. Maybe it's happiness. Maybe it's upward mobility. Maybe it's to have prestige. But what does success really, truly look like? And how do you move from, a burnout culture to a healthy work-life balance? A Gallup poll recently said that 6 in 10 are emotionally detached at work. 60% of us are emotionally detached at work. 44% reported to experience a lot of stress the previous day. Now, this is Second year in a row that is reported the highest level of stress in our culture in the Western American world. 63% of all workers experience burnout. 40% believe it's an inevitable part of success. How do we move from burnout to a healthy work-life balance? Is there a way to infuse your work with meaning and purpose? Like what you're doing can be infused with meaning and purpose. There's this idea of quiet quitting. It happens when someone psychologically just disengages from work. They may be physically present or logged on, but they don't know what to do or why it even matters. Is there a way to infuse meaning and purpose into your work? Or are you simply destined to eke out your days? But could there be a better way? Now, the Proverbs speaks a lot about work. In fact, something that you may want to do over the month, you don't even have to do it over the month, you could just do it this week, is read through the Proverbs and just begin to underline every area where it talks about work. God has a lot of wisdom for us here. And Proverbs 29:18, this is our memory verse, so if you got your 3x5 card, go ahead and grab it. Here's what the scripture says. Where there is no revelation, people cast off restraint, but blessed is the one who heeds wisdom and instruction. Where there is no revelation, or some of your translations might say vision. Another translation says prophetic revelation. Where there is no, another translation I like, it says redemptive revelation of God. Don't you want that for your work? Like a redemptive? It's restoring or buying back its original meaning. Like the things that we're putting that 90,000 hours to, a redemptive, restorative revelation of God. And where there isn't any of that, this is so interesting, people cast off restraint. Meaning that I love just kind of the picture of restraint, and the definition of restraint is this: a measure or a condition that keeps someone or something under control or within its limits. And we often think of restraint like a bad thing, like I want to live as free as I possibly can, but here's the reality. We understand that restraints are quite good. You put on your seatbelt every time you get into the car because you want to be restrained and not go through the windshield. And then you also, like on a curvy road, right? Nobody complains about the guardrails, right? You're not like, oh my goodness, those are lame. Are you kidding me? Like, they just put them up there. I want to get as close to the edge as I possibly can, and I just want to see down as far as I can. And these guardrails are keeping me. No. Right? We get this. But here's the thing, when we think about work and when we don't have vision, we don't understand God's wisdom for our work, we throw out the boundaries that keep us in place for our souls and for our good that He's given us. He says, but blessed is the one who heeds wisdom and instruction, God's wisdom for our work. There's this old parable, layers, if you've ever heard of it. It goes to our work. It says, the first, a guy comes up to a bricklayer, these three guys, and he asks them, what are you doing? And the bricklayer says, well, I'm laying bricks, thank you very much. And he walks over to the second bricklayer, and he says, what are you doing? And he says, well, I'm building a wall. And it's like, okay, well, this one's laying bricks, this one's building a wall. And then he goes up to the third bricklayer, and he says, what are you doing? And that bricklayer says, I'm building a cathedral. And it said that the first had a job, the second had a career, the third had a calling. He saw the bigger meaning and purpose behind what he was doing. That, yes, it's an individual brick, and it's part of something bigger and more significant. And so what we want to do with our time together is I hope to give you some vision for your work. Hope to give you some perspective, and that we zoom out and see, okay, what does God say about our work? And how do we then live in a way that makes work, well, work. So let me give you today just a brief theology of work, a vision for work. And so as we begin down a theology of work, the first thing I want you to notice about a theology of work is, one, God works and has created us to work. I feel like I have a wall between us. I'm like, oh my goodness, we're okay. Maybe you didn't. I did. But God works and created us to work. You'll notice Genesis 1, in the beginning, God, help me out, created, thank you. He created, he worked, right? And then if you go to Genesis 2, God's invitation and calling of humanity was to work. So there was work before in the garden. In perfection, there was work. In paradise, there was work. And God actually works as a part of this. And so this confronts some of the myths that we have about work. The first is that work is a necessary evil. Isn't that the way some of us think about it? You know, we work to live. Maybe a weekend warrior. The goal is to retire young and to truly be able to enjoy life. That work is somehow this necessary evil. We just got to get through it, gut through it, and get by, and hopefully get beyond it. The second thing that this confronts, though, is that work is everything. As you understand and we begin to zoom out, and we'll look a little bit later on in the creations narrative, is that we can begin, though, some of us, work is our world. It's our lives. We don't live to work. We work to live. And so you work on the weekends to get ahead, and the goal is to be highly successful in your field or in your industry, which then this begins to permeate, and this is actually one of the great challenges, because hardwired and created in who we are as Imago Dei, we are made to work. There will be work in heaven, by the way. You'll have significant, meaningful things to put your mind and your hands to be artists and creatives. But work, this myth, defines my worth. And that's true for so many of us because we spend so much time, and part of our Imago Dei is in being a co-creator, a co-worker with our Heavenly Father, but it can subtly become our worth. You know, we can confuse our net worth with our self-worth. We can confuse, my identity, and this comes up so many times as we go through job transitions or struggles, because it's like, okay, if I'm not doing well at work, am I actually all that worthy? And then finally, work is only what you're paid for is another myth. But work is actually far much more than that. One definition of work is the production of value by the action of our thoughts and bodily efforts upon available resources. Is that work is actually moves far beyond the scope of like what we are paid for. And I think, especially in church world, so this is all across the board, but in church world, a long time ago, if you were a mother and worked, it was kind of looked down upon. And then I think now in our day and age, if you're a mother and don't work, it's kind of looked down upon, or a parent or a father in that regard. And so God works, and he created us to be co-workers. And there is this shift. And in our culture, we think about retirement, right? About vacation. We work, I don't know about you, but we often work for a vacation or this, one day to be able to retire. Retirement's, by the way, a very new concept. It's only about 100 to 150 years old. People didn't ever retire. If you ever want to read, this is a fun book, Younger Next Year. It's a great book. My wife got it for me. I was deeply offended. Totally. I saw this in our Amazon queue as being mailed to our house, Younger Next Year. I was like, and the subtitle says, How to Stay Fit, Sexy, and Strong Well into Your 80s and Beyond. And I'm like, oh, Jenny doesn't need that. And then she gave it to me. And I'm like, what in the world? And I love it. It's a great book. It's not a Christian book by any means. It's a great book. One of the premises is that you can't reverse aging, but most of what we see in our day and our culture is decaying, not aging. So it talks a lot about some of the fundamental things that we need. One of them is this, we need consistent, healthy exercise. It's a big on exercise and that impact, obviously healthy nutrition. But what was interesting too is it goes on to say, because some of the problems with retirement, what it does is it pulls us out of community. It says what you need is you need deep, meaningful community, so in small groups, in relationship, and then you also need meaningful work. And how often you see people decay and lose their luster for life because they just stepped out of things that were meaningful to put their hands and their minds to. And so we think of, working towards a vacation, but often the biblical picture is vocation. Not vacation, vocation. It's from the Latin vocar, to call. And it's this idea, Tim Keller writes, a job is a vocation only if someone else calls you to it and you do it for them rather than for yourself. And so our work can be a calling only if it's reimagined as a mission of service to something beyond merely our own interest. Let me ask you, what would it be like to begin to look at your work more than a career, but then as a vocation, as a calling? Colossians 3:23 says, whatever you do, go ahead and say, whatever you do with me. Whatever you do. So it doesn't matter what you do. Whatever you do. You're like, well, I'm not in the job that I really like. I get that. And I think it's really great to pursue and maybe move into a new career, a new job. Well, I'm just a student right now, Ryan. I get that. I'm just showing up, at my, I was a window tinter for, maybe you're a window tinter, or whatever you do. Work at it with all your heart. Whoa. Wait a second. I'm supposed to work at it with all my heart, whatever I'm doing, wherever I'm placed, where you have me? Yeah, well, why in the world would I do that? I don't even like where I work, and I don't like the boss who I work for, my coworkers. Yikes. The environment. I'm not even really passionate about the mission that they're about, they're after. He says, work at it with all your heart, as for working for who? The Lord. See, this shifts how we work. Not for men, since you know that you'll receive an inheritance, who? From the Lord as your reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. The minute you shift your job and your work, instead of going, I'm doing this to get paid, I'm doing this to make mine, I'm doing this to get financially free, and some of those aren't necessarily bad things. I'm doing this to, provide for my family. All those things are fine things. They're good things. You know what? I'm doing this for Jesus. The one we just sang about, the one that saved me, the one that gave me new life. And so I'm going to present this to my boss as if I'm presenting it to Jesus. I'm going to present this to the customer as if I'm presenting it to Jesus. Jesus, are you well pleased with my work? Are you well pleased with my heart attitude and the way I'm working? Are you well pleased with the way that I'm speaking to my coworkers and the way I'm thinking? Are you well pleased with the integrity of heart upon which I am doing my work? He says, whatever you do, do it as unto the Lord Jesus. And it infuses whatever you do with meaning and purpose. And we'll get back to that thought at the end of the sermon. First, theology of work. God works, and he created us to be a co-worker with him. And so work is not a necessary evil. It's actually something that is good and for our good. Yet, number two, God set boundaries to work for our good. There's boundaries to it. Remember, where there is no revelation, people cast off what? Restraint, the boundaries. There's boundaries to our work. Genesis 2, you see that 6 days God worked, God created, and one day he rested. You'll also notice in the Genesis account, we talked about this a year ago in our series, Try Softer, did a whole sermon on Sabbath. But that actually, the Jewish understanding is, and you'll see it in the Genesis account, Genesis 1, he'll always say there's night and there's day. And the Jewish day actually begins at sunset. And we start ours with sunrise. And so often in the Western world, we begin with work and we work to rest. And the Hebrew understanding of it was you begin with rest and you work from rest. You are a finite being with limited capacity that requires daily renewal and weekly reset. You're a finite being. You have limited time, energy. Just let that sink in. We hate that. We hate being finite. We hate being limited. And the minute you begin to embrace it, you are able to say no and realize that there's a better yes. All the research, and you can go do the study, will tell you how much sleep matters to our effectiveness, our overall well-being, and Sabbath rest. Pete Scazzaro writes this about Sabbath, that a biblical Sabbath is a 24-hour block of time in which we stop work, enjoy rest, practice delight, and contemplate God. Jesus didn't come to abolish the Sabbath. He came to redeem it. The Pharisees, he said, you made this the Sabbath for, work. It's against the man. It's like we're having to be under it, but God made the Sabbath for man. Like it's for your good because you're a finite being with limited capacity. And we got to pause. In the Silicon Valley hustle, in the grind, we got to say no. Stanford has done a lot of research on this, and in their study, they concluded that when you begin to work over 50 hours a week, the productivity just declines sharply. When you work over 55 hours a week, it begins to move in a negative. If you work 70 hours a week, the study shows that you're no more productive than you work 55 hours a week. And you know what's interesting is there is, we have just a crazy pace, crazy demands, lots and lots of pressure to produce. And there's a book, Alex Sujung Kim Pang, he's a Stanford researcher, professor, called Rest, Why You Get More Done When You Work Less. And he says, busyness is not a means to accomplishment, but an obstacle to it. Like there's boundaries to work for our good, and we're actually more productive when we lean into those boundaries. Like when you actually take time to sleep, you'll be more productive. If you actually keep a Sabbath, you'll be more productive. God works. God created us to be co-workers with him. God set boundaries to work for our good. Third, after the fall, work became more difficult. In Genesis 3:17, it says, cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil, you'll eat food from it all the days of your life. We live in a sinful, broken world where work is more difficult. It's our identity gets confused with it. We have pride and selfishness and self-aggrandization. We have division and frustration and pain and chaos and lying and cheating and bosses and coworkers that, I remember when we first were in ministry, my wife said something to this extent after a year in ministry. She said, if it wasn't for the people, ministry would be easy. Because then you really start to get to know people, and then you're at work, if it wasn't for her or it wasn't for him, gosh, this would be so much easier. After the fall, work became more difficult. Now, I want to just take a moment, and this is just, I've drawn this quadrant a bunch lately as I've talked to people. Most of you, I'm probably sure you're familiar with it. I was meeting with I called him a young man, but he's in his early 30s now. Incredible guy, loves Jesus, working full time, going back to school to get his master's, has small kids, he serves here at Awakening. We were sitting and talking, a few months ago, and he under the crushing weight of all those sort of things, he's like, I'm not exercising, I'm not eating right. I don't have really good times with Jesus. And so in my office, he began to just share I need to do this. I need to do this. I need to do this. And I was like, well, time out. I think you need to do less. Because in the Silicon Valley, you're highly motivated, high achievers, and can't you should all over yourself so much? I should be doing this, I should be doing that, living under this weight, this guilt, this pressure. And in my office, I just drew this kind of 4 quadrants. Stephen Covey's 4 quadrants. This is the area where I know my wife and I get stuck a lot, and we have this conversation. They've been around forever, but we get pulled into the urgent that we neglect the important. Quadrant 1 is when you're responding to crisis or pressing problems, deadline-driven projects. Some of that's, you just can't get away from some of it. A deadline-driven project. I have to have a sermon every single Sunday. If I don't, hey, thank you. I appreciate that. The result, when we live in quadrant 1, when it's urgent and important all the time, stress, burnout, crisis management, always putting out fires. Does that resonate? I know it does for me. Quadrant 2 is urgent, or not urgent, but important. This is probably when you think in evaluating, sometimes we're living in this difficult life of work, but it's like when we don't invest in the right areas, gosh, we just get caught in a cycle. Quadrant 2, relationship building, finding new opportunities, long-term planning, prevention activities, personal growth, recreation. It's taking the Sabbath. It's saying no. It's investing in good friendships and relationships. It's actually taking care of your health and well-being. Result, vision, balance, life-giving. Quadrant 3, it's things that are urgent but not important. It's interruptions, some emails and calls and meetings, popular activities, proximate and pressing matters. And sometimes it's really hard to discern between quadrant 1 and quadrant 2, isn't it? And yet there's things that your coworkers put on you, right? Because they were not, responsible. And then all of a sudden you're responding to their urgent needs and you're having to fix things. We live in this. And so many of us live in quadrant 3. The result is short-term focus. You feel victimized or out of control. You have maybe shallow or broken relationships. You end up being, your reputation, kind of chameleon because you just kind of blend in. You're always going along with things, but you have this underlying sense of maybe bitterness building. In quadrant 4, it's not important and not urgent. It's trivia, busy work, time wasters. What is a time waster? Help me out. Y'all out some time wasters. Netflix. Okay. Yeah. Huh? Social media. Yeah. What else? That's it. That's all we got is Netflix and social media. That's right. Time wasters, some calls, emails, some pleasant activities. When you live, now notice, when you live in this, when you live in it, the result is irresponsibility, dependent on others, and you often get fired from your job because you're not responsible. We don't have a ton of people in quadrant 4 in the Silicon Valley, but we visit it sometimes because we're in burnout too much. That's where are the rhythms of my life numbing or nourishing? Because we live this incessant pace, we don't actually rest our souls, and so what happens is then we go to quadrant 4 just to get by, just to numb out. The theology of work, God works. It's good to work. You're created to be a co-worker with Him. God actually set boundaries. When we understand His vision, there's boundaries for your good. The truth of the matter is after the fall, work became difficult and hard. And sometimes we have this vision like, if I really follow Jesus, everything will work out perfectly and my work will be great. And Jesus said, in this life you'll have trouble. That means with your work too. But take heart, I have overcome the world. I'm with you through it all. And finally, all honest work is sacred work. All honest work is sacred work. One of the myths we buy into is that there is this breakdown between sacred work and secular work. I think the enemy wants to hijack you of meaning and purpose at your work and show up and somehow believe what I'm doing is keeping me from being spiritual. In fact, Jesus would say it this way in the Sermon on the Mount. You are the salt of the what? Earth. And the light of the world. I'm pretty sure then that means the earth, the world, your work. And what if God placed you where you're at, and you're at Netflix, you're at Instagram, you're at ABC Company. That's the only thing that could come in my mind right after Netflix and Instagram. And you're showing up every day, and you're just trying to get through it. You're teaching, but you're just kind of going through the motions. And God's like, wait a second, you're salt. You're light. I have a purpose and a plan for you. When my wife and I were first married, we lived in downtown Chicago. And I can't remember when I share stories, so if I've shared this before, forgive me. We were living in downtown Chicago, and we needed benefits. And so she started to work at Starbucks. And in college, she was a barista and manager. And so she started working at Starbucks. I just had to give a caveat why she was working at Starbucks, because we're love coffee. And I have some dear friends that work at Starbucks. But I'm kind of a third wave coffee guy. That was too much information right there for you. But she's working downtown Chicago, and the very first day, this gal looks at her and goes, "You're one of those Christians, aren't you?" She's like, "What?" "Yeah, I can tell." She wasn't wearing any jewelry, any crosses. She wasn't saying, "Bless you." She wasn't, having any of the Christianese, any of those things. She just showed up on day one at a job in the center of a city that is so far from Jesus, that is in a hurried, hustled pace. And her presence was so counter to the culture that someone looked and said, "You have to be a Christian." Because the Spirit of the living God dwells inside her, and wherever she went, light was being shined and salt was breaking the ground. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. And don't you dare believe the lie that your work is worthless. Don't believe the lie that it's keeping you from being spiritual. Don't you dare go down that road. What you're doing matters, and you're close to people who desperately need to hear about the love of Jesus. No. They need to see the love of Jesus in you. Just imagine. Just a church this size. If we began to realize, embrace, live out, gosh, God, you placed me here. You called me here. I'm not living for a vacation. I have a vocation. Nothing wrong with the vacation, but I have a calling right here. And it doesn't mean that you're in a place where you're like, I would like a better job. That's fair. But while I'm in this job, whatever I do, I may want a new job, but whatever I do, I'm going to work at it as unto the Lord, recognizing that I'm salt and light right here, right now. Just imagine what God would want to do in and through a community that said a profound yes to his vision for work. And we got out of the Silicon Valley hustle. We got out of the trappings. Where there's no vision, where there's no revelation, where there's no redemptive revelation of God, people cast off restraints. But blessed, happy, Like not that you're just like feeling happiness all the time. Blessed is this, you're happy you did it this way. It's a life that you're happy with. Blessed is the one who heeds wisdom and instruction. Let's pray. Jesus, thank you so much for this word that you give us, that leads us, that guides us, that doesn't leave us to figure out life on our own. Thank you that you actually speak profoundly into the 90,000 hours of our life and long for our flourishing. Long to infuse meaning and purpose into the activities of our day. And so today we just bring what's in our hands, our work, our lives, and say, have your way. Have your way. And maybe right now as you're processing, you would wrestle with, who have I been working for? Maybe it's myself. Maybe it's for somebody else. And today you go, no, Jesus, I'm going to work for you. I'm going to work for you. It's all for you and because of you. And so I bring all of me to you. In Jesus' name.